Welcome back to the podcast that exists to enrich and inspire young Latinos.
Bienvenidos al podcast que existe para enriquecer e inspirar a jóvenes latinos. Well, welcome everybody to the Joy of the Gospel podcast, La Alegría del Evangelio. We are very, very honored today to have Dr. Josh Packard, the Executive Director of the Springtide Research Institute. Josh, thank you for joining us today.
Vicente, I'm really happy to be here. I love the work that you all do, and I'm glad to get a chance to talk and share a little bit about the work that we're doing at Springtide.
Thank you. So, Josh, just to jump right on, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background? And I love to hear a little bit more about the Springtide Institute, Research Institute. What is it? What is your mission?
Yeah, thanks. It's an honor for me always to get invited into these spaces that are religious. I come at this as an academic. I have a PhD in sociology. Been studying religious trends in America for the last 15 years or so, and that's the background that I come into the podcast with, and how it sort of informs all the work that we do at Springtide. And at Springtide, our focus is on the inner and outer lives, the sort of religious and daily lives of 13 to 25-year-olds. What we like to say as the mission is that we believe that no young person should have to answer life's most difficult questions alone. So we do research and provide frameworks to ensure that people like you and others who are working with young people, can be there when they're having those conversations. So that's what we do. We do research, we write reports, we do custom research for different organizations too that are trying to explore that in their own way. But everything is right in that sweet spot, 13 to 25-year-olds across all faith backgrounds and traditions and no tradition. Wherever they're going to ask the questions, that's where we go to find out what they're doing.
That's wonderful. And before beginning with the conversation, you have published 3 reports. Am I correct?
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about the reports before we jump into the conversation?
Yep. So the first one came out last year called Belonging, Reconnecting America's Loneliest Generation, which is Gen Z. This current generation is the most isolated. There you go. The most isolated generation that we've ever had. And we sort of outlined why that is and some ways to combat that. And then we wrote a book in the summer called Meaning Making, really exploring the values for people who are running organizations that need to know what kind of values they need to live out in order to attract young people. There it is. Thanks. This is great. If you're trying to either engage young people as volunteers or as users, customers, or as employees to understand what sort of values you need to live out. And then our flagship product, every year we do the State of Religion and Young People. So the State of Religion and Young People 2020 is all focused on relational authority. And then, and Vicente, you were nice enough to come to, and that one actually is free because we have a generous donation that makes it free in digital form. And then a foundation contacted us after we published it to ask if we would do a Catholic specific edition. And Vicente, you were nice enough to contribute a little overview of Iskali and the work that you all are doing there to that. So that's going to come out here in a couple of weeks. And so we're really excited about that.
I just want to say, if you're working with young people, if you're interested about young people, you must have these reports before we begin. They are a must. Thank you for doing that for us. Thank you for doing that for the church, if I can say that.
Yeah.
So, Josh, you have researched extensively in religion in America, particularly relationships to young people in relationship. What are some of the major trends you are seeing in this relationship of young people and religion?
I imagine that the stuff that we are seeing is the same stuff that you're seeing. We just have numbers for it. We just have the research. It's the dominant trend that characterizes religion in America over the last, 20 or 30 years is the loss of trust in social institutions of all kinds. So this is not just a story about religious institutions. People are losing trust across the board in all kinds of institutions. And now what we see with the current generation of 13 to 25-year-olds, Gen Z, is the first time that we've got a group of people, young people who are being raised. They didn't lose trust in institutions. They're being raised in this environment by parents who never raised them to have trust in those institutions in the first place. And that's the biggest difference between now and, say, 15 or 20 years ago.
That's wonderful. What do you think is the root of this? Not trusting institutions?
Yeah, that is sort of the $1 million question. I'm not going to say that the diagnosis doesn't matter, because I think it does um, at some level, but I think we can get too hung up on the diagnosis. So, we can spend a whole lot of time trying to figure out uh, what caused it, but it won't change the reality that it exists. Um, I was giving a presentation a few months ago. I guess it's longer ago now, pre-COVID, because it was in person. And at the end of my presentation, this person stands up and says, "But young people are on their phones all the time." And I said, "Okay, like I don't know what you want me to do about that. Like, the world changes, and yeah, is it does the introduction of social media and digital technology, does that make your old way of doing your job of engaging with young people harder? Probably. I don't know, but the point is, like, it's not going away, so we need to figure out a way to deal with it. um, I don't mean to be evasive about your question, because I think we know some things that loss of trust is not associated with, more than what it is associated with. And although there have been some big failures over the last 30 or 40 years in terms of our institutions, politically, starting with Watergate, um, and really just the access to information shining more light on regular failures that causes this erosion of trust. Um, we don't hear a whole lot of evidence from people saying that it was, because of such and such scandal, or, in the religious front, like, because of pastors doing this thing, I've decided to walk away from the faith, or anything like that. Those might be embedded reasons why people never explore institutionalized or organized faith to begin with. I think that's a potential reason, but I think that there are some bigger structural reasons around the decline of the middle class that probably contribute more to those things, and more to the loss of trust than anything else. So institutions just aren't particularly working for people like they used to in the 1960s and 70s, and especially for people who are not a part of dominant groups, people who are not, like me, frankly, cisgendered white dudes. Uh, the institutions aren't working for them, and as our country increasingly is diversified, it begs a question of, why should they trust those institutions in the first place?
Yeah, thank you for that, Josh. I really believe that it we should focus in the fact that, well, the world is changing.
Yeah.
Let's understand the changes, and understand, hopefully find out the better way forward. Uh, Talking about changes, I think one of the conversations that perhaps we have engaged with young people is uh, this idea of I'm a spiritual but not religious. What do you have to say about that?
Well, so in the State of Religion and Young People 2020, we break down these old categories of affiliated and unaffiliated. And there used to be this, I think it was a reasonable assumption. If a young person told you, or anybody told you, that they were affiliated with a particular faith tradition, then we could assume a lot of things about them pretty correctly. Maybe how often they prayed, or what sacred texts they read, or what rituals they went through, etc. And if they were unaffiliated, then we could assume they didn't do those things, and maybe even weren't interested in those things. The data over 10,000 surveys and 150 interviews with young people suggests that framework is completely useless at this point. I mean, it's so much more complicated than that. So we've got people who are affiliated, nearly half of them, young people who are affiliated, telling us that they have no trust in organized religion, or very little trust in organized religion. So, even if they're saying that they belong to something, or claiming an identity, it doesn't mean that they necessarily are, like, signing up lock, stock, and barrel. And we've got a whole lot of people who are unaffiliated saying that they, engage in regular religious practices like prayer. Um, so it's a much more complicated world. And I think what we're seeing in that, um, in the sort of run away from, wanting to claim this identity as religious, is that religion is associated with an institutional identity. And if we combine this with that trust conversation that we were just having, we've got people who are very, very interested in God. Young people are, still believe at a high level. They still want the conversation. They still want to explore, but they would like to do it in a framework that doesn't include them having to identify with a particular institution. And so the only term left for that is spiritual. we've been seeing the need. I'd be curious about your thoughts here too, Vicente. We've been seeing the need for sort of new language around those things, because I'm not sure spiritual really captures the sort of interest and level and rigor that young people have. But I know that they're not going to claim, a lot of them will just not claim religious as an identity either. So there's a new language emerging. We're just not sure what it is yet.
Yeah, I definitely see that. If young people are still interested in God, but they not necessarily are interested in organized religion, I think this says something about young people, but it also says something about organized religion. What do you think, first, what do you think this says about young people in a new generation of young people? What do you think that says about what we have today or recognize today as organized religion?
Well, I think that a lot of the structures that we built in organized religion over the last half century were incredibly effective. They were just incredibly effective for a different world. So I know we talked, a lot of your listeners here are not going to necessarily be super familiar with this example because they might be too young. But there used to be this store called Blockbuster, and you would go into Blockbuster, Vicente? You go and you'd rent movies. Yeah. So this is great. I thought this was the greatest thing ever when I was a kid. Like, you could just walk into the store and they would have walls and walls and walls of movies, VHS tapes.
Good memories. Good memories.
Yeah. And you could get, if they had it, you could rent, anything. But look, Blockbuster doesn't exist anymore, obviously. Everything is streaming. But Blockbuster didn't go away because people stopped caring about movies. Blockbuster went away because the mode of delivery, the thing that they were so good at, was no longer needed. And, it led to their inability to pivot, sort of led to their decline. I think the churches, especially in the ways that we engage with young people, is sort of in that same spot where, the decline that the church is experiencing is not because young people have stopped caring about God any more than people have stopped watching movies. It's just that the mode of delivery that the church has been so good at, in the same way that Blockbuster was so good at, is just being replaced. And unfortunately, I think, at Springtide, we firmly believe that young people's lives, where they are full and at their most robust, are when they have a thriving spiritual self. And so I would say, unfortunately, we don't have a whole lot of really good options like Netflix or Hulu or things like that to meet that need that still exists. And slow to pivot here, to find these new and innovative ways of reaching out and forming relationships with young people, and understanding what the new reality is, that they're just not coming. There's not any reason to think. There's no data that we have. There are no social trends that I see that makes me think that young people are going to start coming back to church or to church, if they've never been, on Sunday morning, sitting in pews doing confirmation classes.
What a great story! The interest for movies is still there. Just the delivery is what matters. Speaking about the delivery of the message, just speaking about, there's still a great interest about God. We just need to think about, how do we respond to that? How do you think the church should respond to that?
Well, the data that we lay out in the State of Religion and Young People, and starting with belonging, really suggests that even though it's counterintuitive, because we think of young people as being super connected on their phones all the time, the reality is that they are really in need of trusted adult relationships. Somewhere around 1 in 5 to 1 in 3 young people tell us that they have one or fewer trusted adult in their life, including their parents. And that is a problem screaming out for a solution. And I'm not sure that any young person can be in a position to hear any message that you might have about God or a sacred text or a moral code or anything if they're lacking in basic human connection. And so meeting those needs on a very basic level, becoming those trusted adults, developing your relational authority with them, is, I think, step one.
You just said a key term that I think a lot of our listeners are going to be like, what does that mean? Relational authority. In your last report, you go deep into unpacking what relational authority is. Can you unpack that for us a little bit?
Yeah. So we, I don't Vicente, you work with young people a lot, and I don't know how you would see this, but we we had this hypothesis. Maybe I was crazy for even having it, but like I thought that young people were going to be like, I want adults, who will empower me and let me be me, and sort of like basically be a friend. And we were stunned to see that overwhelmingly young people were telling us like, I don't want adults to be my friend. I want adults to be adults. But that means that like they also, the other thing that they don't want, that they don't find any resonance with or credence in, is the adult who is only an expert, right? So that would be me when I get up and teach at my college classes. Like they don't, just because I have a PhD and all this like credentials or whatever, that doesn't mean they trust me. I wish it did, but it doesn't. And so, what they tell us is that they're really looking for adults who do this sort of combination of things that we wrapped up into this framework of relational authority after testing it and asking a lot of questions. And there's 5 dimensions. They want adults who can listen, who are transparent, who have integrity, who demonstrate care, and have expertise. Now, if you do the expertise part without any of the other 4, then what they think is that you're actually acting in the best interests of the institution that you serve or work with or for, or maybe even your own ego. If you only do the other 4, if you only do listening, transparency, integrity, and care, and no expertise, then that's where they get into friend territory, and they're like, you're not actually that useful to me. I have other places where I get these things. So it really is about bringing all those 5 dimensions together.
So we should be working as a church and listening to young people. We should be more transparent. We should not be apologetic about our expertise, but that should not be in the forefront. We should not be afraid of giving substance and offering substance, which I think we have plenty of. Integrity, right? I think integrity is very important. Is how do we walk the walk, right? I think it's probably the way that we are understanding integrity here. How do what we say match what we do? And then caring, simple but powerful. We should care. And I think Pope Francis talks about this,
Yes.
People in the church should feel that the church cares for them. First of all, we should care for them. So I really appreciate that. I think this has given me a lot of value to the understanding of what we do here in Iskali. Of we should work on these 5 pillars of listening, transparency, expertise, integrity, and care. So I really believe you are pointing at something that can really give ministries like Iskali guidance. But I think hopefully we should be talking about these 5 pillars of, relational, what a good relationship looks like with young people of institutions. I don't know if you have any additional comments about this.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you've seen that already. I mean, even in our earlier conversations, I've been fortunate enough to get to learn about some of the work that you all do, and it's I think you all sort of are a good example of what happens when there's some people who have stumbled into this framework already, or I don't mean stumbled like you didn't know what you were doing. I just mean that without having seen the research, you just found out what worked, and a lot of the success that those places are having is because they're operating sort of outside of these traditional frameworks, and they're just going back to ground zero and saying, okay, what do young people need? What do we have available to us, and how can we close that gap? I think you mentioned Pope Francis, and there's the recent, I can't remember is it an encyclical that talked about, was it Christus Vivit? It's an encyclical that talks about accompaniment, and this fits right in with that framework. It's maybe providing more of a detailed breakdown around, okay, so what, how can we do accompaniment effectively with young people? But I hear stories all the time about young people who they might know cognitively that a particular adult has the right plan for their life, but they also they'll tell you I know it's better or the right thing, but I won't do it because I don't really think they care about me. And so, like, it's an interesting conundrum when you really press them on it. They'll tell you, like, yeah, I guess I probably should do that. But the like opening up the pathway to being able to hear that message, that expertise, like that doesn't occur until you really demonstrate that you're in this for them and not for you and not for your organization, but you're in it for them.
I'm very curious. So I'm going to ask you a question.
Okay.
When you talk about relational authority to church leaders, what is the reaction? I really want to know.
So people who are employed in some capacity to do youth ministry, they nod with me and are like, yes, of course, we know that that's what we should do. And so then I ask them, why don't you do it? And it comes back down, often comes to a question of measurement. So, what are their bosses holding them accountable to? And it's usually attendance numbers. Maybe it's a number of people who went through confirmation or dollars donated or something like that. And that's where the innovation needs to come. I mean, I don't think that we need much innovation actually in terms of how the people with the boots on the ground do this kind of work. I think they know how to do that work. We need innovation though around how to measure that so that we can communicate that up the chain of command about the impact that we're having, beyond just a feeling. Oh, I really, we made a breakthrough. Like we need some ways of designing those. And so putting those into frameworks, talking about the length of time that a young person is engaged with us as opposed to the number of times. Some of those things really matter. So when I talk to pastors, though, they look at me like I'm a crazy person, and they want to know how does this scale? Like if we're doing just relationships, how do we do relationships with 100 young people simultaneously? And is that even possible? And of course, it's possible. That part of what the relational authority, like breaking it down into these 5 components, providing some research here around it, means that it's a lot easier then to train volunteers and parents and other people who want to be involved with your ministry. It's really hard to train volunteers to get them to sign up for something and do it effectively when you're asking them to, like, hey, be a presence in the life of this young person. They don't know what that means. Nobody likes to have unclear objectives or goals or lack of direction. But when we can come to them and say, look, these are the 5 things we want to do, right? We want to move this young person in their relationship from this point, relationship with God, from this point to this point. We're going to do it by, exhibiting these 5 traits. Can you chart and document how you're doing that over the course of these next 7 weeks, and then we'll talk again, or whatever it is. Like that provides a lot more clarity about how to go about doing those things, and that's how we begin to scale relationships. I wish I didn't have to spell it out so clearly, because I like to think that a lot of the people are smart and they can figure this stuff out, but people are also busy and they're stressed and they've been trained in one particular system, and so a lot of times it does take really sitting down, especially for the people who have their boots on the ground, taking something like the state of religion in young people, which they're probably already doing because they see that they've intuitively found it to work, and taking it to their bosses and saying, okay, we're going to start doing this and we're going to start measuring it in this way, and this is the kind of reports we're going to give you, et cetera. Because what we're doing right now, frankly, just isn't working.
I also think what you did here is it's a great reminder that ministry is relational. Relational authority. I think many times, Josh, what I have seen is that we forgot that ministry is about a relationship. It's about a relationship we have with those that you walk with, but it's also about how do you move, improve, inspire young people to have better relationships with those that are in their lives and have a closer relationship with God. And I think that conversation itself is a conversation we need to have, that ministry is relational, that if we put everything in a program without thinking about relationships that are intentional, that are intimate, we're not going to go anywhere.
I think it's often useful for me to think in terms of metaphors. And a really helpful metaphor to clarify this in my head was thinking about this as the difference between a party and a family dinner. And I think for a long time, I have a lot of friends who went into youth ministry right out of college and have stayed in touch with them. And we talk with we're doing focus groups right now. You can sign up on our website with youth ministers from across the country, faith leaders who work with young people in some capacity. And what we hear is that they spend a lot of time basically trying to build a party that's the greatest party that they can build, right? So that they can attract a whole lot of young people to come to it, And then they'll form relationships with young people at that party or connect them to other people at that party so they can have relationships there. And that's that old model, right? That's that Blockbuster model of like, we're going to build this really great thing. And I think what we need to shift to, for a variety of reasons, is this metaphor of the family dinner, so that when a young person comes to an event that you're hosting, they're not showing up at a party where they don't know anybody, or maybe only one person, and it's overwhelming, and they could be in socially awkward positions depending on their identities or what their interests are, or their just competency in forming relationships. Instead, coming to an event that you're hosting should feel like coming home. And it should be that way because you've laid this groundwork through individual relationships, well ahead of time. So that by the time they show up, it's like, oh, like this isn't an anxiety-ridden place where you don't know how to navigate it. It should feel comfortable, and it should feel like a place where you're welcomed already. Not that somebody's told you that you're welcomed, but that you feel it and you know it.
I have two comments to say to that. One is, if I'm understanding or interpreting this correctly, is moving from an event-driven ministry model to a relational-driven ministry model, right? And then, and your second point about feeling at home, I think, when you feel welcome, Josh, if I invite you over my house and you feel welcome, that still means that you are a visitor. I'm welcoming you. And I think we need to change this conversation of like, if we are the church, when you are at the church, you are at home. You are not even welcome. You are the owner of the house, right? Like,
right.
This is like, these pews are yours. Like, this is a place where we gather as an assembly to practice what we believe in. And I think we having the initial conversation of making people feel at home. But my good friend, Timothy Matubina at the University of Notre Dame has always said this, we need to let them know that this is their home. It's like farther, is deeper than that.
Yeah, I agree. And I hope I was speaking accurately. I might have misstated it. I don't mean to say that it should be like coming to somebody else's home. I mean that it should feel like a homecoming, like you are coming back to and I know home can be a fraught place. So whatever home means, for you, wherever that place is for you, that feels like it's yours. That's how we want these events to feel. This is like you are coming to a place where you are known. It is familiar. You feel like it's yours. You have a sense of belonging there. I mean, this is I totally agree. That this sort of shift away from this event-driven ministry needs to happen, and coming into this other thing. That doesn't mean that events don't go away, right? It just means that like there's a lot more foregrounding work that has to happen before we try to get the relationship comes first, and then the event, as opposed to the event and then the relationship.
Yeah, events come. In Latin America, they said, ministry is a process. Events are moments of encounter. They are part of the process, but the entire thing is not focused on the event. Events are moments of encounter of the process, right? Where the community gathers. So events don't go away, because events, as we know, are important, because events, retreats, conferences, for many people, for me myself, have been moments of encounter. So they continue to be part of the process. But the entire focus is not in itself in the event, but more in the relationship. So hopefully somebody's listening.
Well, I think, Vicente, even in that moment that you share, like in that conception of like the event as this periodic moments of encounter, as opposed to the sort of first step in, it changes what we would do at those events, right? Like it changes the very nature of how we would design them, and what we would be, looking for young people to get out of them. I think that's a beautiful way of thinking about it.
Yeah, a lot of young people, even those that are in the church, and maybe those that are not necessarily in the church, continue to look for God, as you know, in a struggle with the institution. What would be your message for them? we've been talking a lot to church leaders, to people that are in the church about how do we change and how do we welcome, how do we integrate. But what should be the message for those that want to be here but are not here?
I sort of reject, first of all, any notion that what I hear from church leaders, more often than I would like, that young people need to do X, they should be doing Y. Any explanation about young people's faith lives that comes back to a conclusion that young people are not doing something right, I think is fundamentally the wrong way to approach this, because they're young people. I mean, they're 15, 16, 17 years old. Like, this is exactly the time that they should be exploring and thinking and trying new things. And if they're not doing what you want them to do, that's not their failure. If anything, it's yours. And so I think for young people, what I would say is that you are not alone. And that is the first and foremost the thing that young people should understand, that there are a whole lot of young people, the majority maybe of young people, who are interested in God, interested in questions of faith, the divine, etc., and are out there like you, looking for places to have those conversations with each other, with trusted adults, with express those things through different organizations, but they don't necessarily know that others are out there like them, and so they might be hesitant to broach the conversation, to go looking, thinking that they might be the only ones there. And I think that points the way forward for adults too, which is to help connect young people to other young people who are interested in those same things.
Yeah, one thing that is coming to my mind, Josh, is belonging, right? A lot of ministries really struggle building a sense of belonging. And working in the Latino community, I think the Latino community as a whole in society, we continue to look for a place of belong. Like, what is our place in society? How are we supposed to vote? Just as we are having that searching that sense of belonging in the U.S. society, I think the Latino community is also looking for a place to belong in the church. And I think it's a struggle. Like, what is our role? What are we supposed to be? What are we supposed to do? Like, what is our call? But overall, sense of belonging is, we talk about it, but I think a lot of the people that I talk to and a lot of the people that I work with, myself, I think we continue to struggle building a sense of belonging among young people. How do you make, or how do you help young people feel part of something?
Well, you ask a really good question, Vicente. And I mean, part of this is, I'll take off researcher hat for just a second and say that there's part of the question is like, what should Latinx people be for the church? And then there's the other side of the question is, what are you? And it's the fastest growing demographic of the Catholic Church. It's by some accounts might be what is keeping the Catholic Church, afloat in many parts of the United States. And I think there's a lot to be learned for the wider church from some things that I understand that we've already touched on a little bit here that come from that culture. And primary among those is the strong understanding at a very felt level, not at an intellectual, heady thing necessarily, but just this deeply ingrained sense that belonging comes before believing. And this is fundamental to my discipline of sociology. It's the very first sociological study ever done that proved that, we don't, and then through 100 years of research that follows, groups of people don't come together and stay together because they share a common set of beliefs. They end up creating a common set of beliefs because they come together and stay together. And the church often gets this backwards. I don't just mean the Catholic Church. I mean the church generally. We tend to think that we have to create people who share a common set of beliefs, and then somehow magically, it'll spring forth a sense of belongingness from this sense, from this community. And the reality is that while that can be short-lived, it's never long-lasting and durable. Instead, what you need to do is to get people together in a group in a way that they know that they are known. In the book, we lay it out as this process of noticed, named, and known, and creating a sense of belonging. And then out of that sense of community and belonging comes a shared sense of beliefs. And so I think if anything, like what can you all do with and for the church is to remind them of that lesson over and over and over again, that belonging precedes believing. And if we try to put it the other way around, we're going to keep stumbling and stumbling and stumbling.
Thank you for that insight. Uh, Just I work with young people in the Latino context out of Chicago. What do you think groups like Iskali should be doing to connect young people again? Forget a little bit about what we do. Just your insight. I'm interested in your insight because I believe that we can always do a better job.
Well, it's a great question, and I think one of the things that people ask me a lot about is because of the age group that we study, 13 to 25-year-olds. They ask me a lot of questions about Gen Z, and what I tell them is that there is no Gen Z. I mean, it's 13 to 25-year-olds and lower. It's the most diverse age group that we've ever had in this country. And the one coming after it will be even more diverse than this one. And so I think what is incumbent upon us as leaders right now is to help facilitate that transition from this notion that there is a monolithic experience in the United States, even among the community that you work with, towards understanding how, like, both the value of diversity and like how to deal with the diversity of experiences and incorporate them and listen to them authentically. And that would be the thing. Not that I think you all do this poorly, but I think that's actually what I would lean into even more, because those are the skills that the church and other organizations are going to need in the future is not only understanding diversity in the classic sense of the word of, like, what insights does your background afford you that I might not have had the opportunity to understand, but also how do you see the diversity within your own group, and how do we make sure that those things come out as well. And I think that there's a real richness there that can lead to a lot of innovation in the ways that we do many, many, many things.
Yeah. Another thing that is coming to my mind is, we continue to go through the pandemic. Last year was definitely a challenge for a lot of young people. Your first report says, Reconnecting Americans' Loneliness Generation. And that was before the pandemic.
Yeah, it was. That's right.
So I feel that even in my own life as an adult, the pandemic has had an effect on who I talk to, how many people do I talk to, who do I meet with, how do I meet with them. And I miss just sitting around with friends having a beer, doing some carne asada in my backyard. So I don't have the data, but I know just from my own experience and the people around me that people are feeling alone.
Yeah.
I don't even want to know what the reality is among younger people that haven't had maybe the opportunity to build a stronger relationships, of people that reach out to them. Honestly, maybe even the opportunity to have healthier relationships. What do you think how do we move on after the pandemic, connecting with this generation that was already alone and is probably have gone farther that way?
Well, first of all, even though it wasn't an invitation, I'm inviting myself over for carne asada and beers once the vaccines get to everybody. I think religious and faith leaders would do well to take some time and explore the frameworks of trauma. So every young person in this country, every person, period, is going to be coming out of, over the next 6 months as life sort of gradually returns back to normal. The last 18 months will have been characterized by this intense period of trauma. And there's no other way to put it. And I'm not sure that adults will, by and large, feel it as much as young people, because, our brains are fully developed. We should be more socially adjusted, et cetera, et cetera. We feel it maybe in the same way that you and I do, which is like this, man, I wish it was different, right? But young people will feel it very much through the frameworks of trauma. And there are some real things that we can do that academics and scholars have shown some frameworks at work about the ways that we engage young people with trauma. It means that what you can expect are that young people coming out of this are going to have, like a whole range of emotional regulation issues. They're going to have feelings that they don't understand and don't know how to control. And they're going to, they're going to be less receptive to new ideas and new people. And we're going to have to rebuild those things. And that's going to be the collective effort of a lot of people. That would be the thing that I would start doing. Now, you notice I didn't say anything about scripture. I didn't say anything about sermons. I don't think that coming out of this in any way, shape, or form next fall, when young people start going back to schools, that they're going to be in a place, Imagine how that would sound to a young person. So imagine how this would sound to a young person. Of, I just went 18 months without any religious leader checking in on me, without practicing how to do faith in any particular way, without having any, real religious conversations. And on top of that, was just trying to keep my life together. And the minute things go back to normal, now you want me to contemplate life after death. And like the difference between right and wrong, and what how I should be treating people. And it's like, forget it, man. Like, if you can't help me figure out what just happened over the last 18 months and why I feel the way I feel, I don't know that you're going to be, of much use to young people, or that they're going to have much time for you. So I think it's incumbent upon religious leaders to start getting attuned to that reality, as quickly as possible.
I've been thinking about how do we celebrate faith this year? How do we celebrate 2020? The end of 2020. And I think one thing is we need to acknowledge that it was difficult. That the sense of acknowledgement that it was difficult, that it was hard, that we lost people we love is a celebration. Because if we just forget about it, if we don't reflect on it, it will be like it never happened. And it's very interesting. I do believe that we are going to have to be very intentional about creating spaces for conversation, creating spaces for people to express their insights, their knowledge, their fears, their hopes. So, going back to relational authority, we're going to have to pay a special attention to listening as we come out of this. And I think we can learn a lot about the state of religion among young people and the state of their own faith, their understanding of God, their understanding of community. I think one thing that we haven't talked about is community, right? How important it is to belong. You belong to something. And the Christian faith and the Catholic Church, you belong to a community. What are some of the characteristics of a healthy community, of a community that embodies relational authority and welcomes you and accompanies you, but also gives you the opportunity to accompany others? Because in a community, everybody's walking together. It's not about what you get, and it's also about what you give it. So I think this gives me a really good sense of we need to start paying attention that right after this, and instead of just moving forward and trying to forget about what happened, we need to acknowledge it, reflect on it. I need it. You probably need it. I think we all need it.
Well, Vicente, I think you hit on this, like that key component of listening, but also like being the adult in the room. So like listening with expertise. So I'll give you a personal example. My son is 10. He has spent his entire 5th grade year at home doing distance learning. So where adults walk around and, you and I and other people talk about, oh, I can't wait till things get back to normal. Well, there's no going back to normal for my son. Like, it's normal for him was 4th grade, but next year he'll be in middle school. So he doesn't understand. Like, he's like, I'm not going back to 4th grade. That's crazy. Like, we had circle time. Like, that's nuts, right? But at the same time, he doesn't understand where he's going to be either. And so us using our expertise, we've been through middle school, like helping them figure out like, okay, what does middle school mean? And also listening about why it's so much harder because he didn't get that 5th grade experience. And that's just a very personal, small example. I think adults talk about returning to normal a lot, but for young people, normal is always emerging on a day-to-day basis. So that framework doesn't make any sense to them. So when you say to a young person, hey, things will get back to normal soon, they're like, what do you mean? Like, it doesn't always make any sense to them. And so I think listening to them about what their fears and concerns are, because they may not be the fears and concerns that you and I have. Like, I really just, personally, I just wanted to get through this and get it over with, maintain my employment, and then go back to my regular routine. There is no regular routine. The difference between 4th grade and 6th grade, like, those are not regular.
Yeah. Definitely a good insight. Well, Josh, any final thoughts about this conversation? Maybe a question. From my end, I think I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you for joining us today. Any final thoughts, questions, reflection?
I really appreciate this, and I'll just say that if people are interested in reading the report, they can on our website, The State of Religion in Young People, or you can go to Apple Books and get it for free. The Catholic edition will be out in a couple of weeks, but you can find all that stuff at springtideresearch.org. And I hope it's useful in some way.
Well, thank you. Thank you for being with us. For everybody listening, thank you for being with us today, learning about the state of religion among young people. And my homework for you will be, think about what this relational authority is, listening, transparency, integrity, care, and expertise. I think that is really useful for us that are in the trenches of ministry to understand. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
No olviden seguirnos en Instagram y en Facebook en Iskali Podcast.
Don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Iskali Podcast.
Listen with us and experience the joy of the gospel.
Escúchanos y experimenta la alegría del Evangelio. Te esperamos.
Dare to dream.
Atrévete a soñar.